Yep, you're reading that right. Kodak. The same Kodak that your dad probably shot your awkward school portraits with. And before that, it was a brand that accompanied your great-grandpappy into the trenches during World War I. Fewer names have as much clout and prestige within the photography world. Well, that is until the world turned digital, at which point it wasn't all smooth sailing for Kodak, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. For now though, all you need to know is that a few years back, Kodak actually joined the mirrorless camera race with this, their Micro Four Thirds monstrosity, the Kodak Pixpro S-1. This is easily one of the weirdest, rarest, and possibly most misunderstood mirrorless cameras ever made. It's like finding out Nokia just dropped a smartwatch, or Blockbuster tried to launch a streaming service way before Netflix. Actually, wait, that last one actually happened. Never mind. The point is, this camera kind of came out of nowhere, took everyone by surprise, and then flopped almost immediately, disappearing off the face of the earth. So obviously, I had to get myself one. Why? Well, because I'm a man of curiosity and bad financial decisions. What can I say? Anyway, how did Kodak end up releasing a budget mirrorless camera in 2014, and why did it go so badly? Well, it all kind of came to a head in 2012 when Kodak officially went bankrupt, and the company's chiefs ended up licensing the Kodak brand to a company called JK Imaging.
JK. LOL.
Who basically said, let's just slap the Kodak logo on a bunch of shit that vaguely resembles a camera and try and milk this cow dry. Shortly after, the Pixpro S-1 was born, released in early 2014, and it was the company's first serious attempt at making a proper mirrorless interchangeable lens camera. And it was also their last, for reasons I'll explain shortly. But first, I did mention earlier on that this is now a fairly rare and kind of obscure camera, so why is it so rare and how did I manage to get a copy? Well, it's rare, firstly, because not many people actually bought them, but also because this camera seems to have suffered from a quality control issue that meant that a lot of them broke. Many of the units, especially earlier ones, suffered from a mechanical fault that caused the shutter to jam closed after taking a photo. Basically, you'd take one shot and it would be lights out, and congratulations, you're now the proud owner of a camera-shaped paperweight. So imagine my shock when I finally found one of these things for sale on eBay at a very reasonable price and bundled as a complete kit that included the body, both of the original kit lenses, and a detachable flash, all in fully working condition. Well, for now at least. I guess it turns out that spending most of your life doom-scrolling auction sites does pay off now and again. Now, we'll obviously talk about the lenses and general image quality a little bit later on, but for now, let's talk about the camera itself, because at first glance, the S1 actually looks kind of alright. I mean, it's compact, it's sleek enough, and it feels, well, passable. Ish. This is the kind of camera that feels like it was made for people who like the idea of photography but also buy decaf coffee and wear Crocs in public. It's lightweight and small enough to fit into a travel bag without too much fuss, but don't go expecting Fujifilm build quality here. As you can probably tell, the body is almost entirely made out of plastic, and not the good stuff either. Think Fisher-Price meets forgotten Kickstarter project. In other words, it doesn't scream pro level, but in fairness, that's because this was intended for the entry-level, low-budget camera market. So when you look at it through that lens, then they've kind of done an okay job. At the very least, it's nice enough to hold. There's a decent rubberized grip on the side here, and it has a proper tilting LCD screen, and the controls are laid out fairly logically. My only gripe really is that whilst there is a proper mode dial on the top here, which is nice, the only command dial on this camera is this fiddly one around the D-pad on the back here, which just can't be used one-handed, well, not comfortably at least. So to change the exposure settings, you are forced to chimp around with both hands a bit. And here's where things get interesting, because you see this camera has a 16 megapixel 4/3 CMOS sensor and could shoot RAW, and the results aren't entirely terrible. Are these the best images I've ever seen? Well, of course not, but for a failed camera that looks like a melted chunk of plastic, it's really not that bad. They even worked up really nicely using my own set of Lightroom presets, which I'm sure you all know by now are available for sale from my website, and as always, I'll leave a link and a discount code below should you want to grab some for yourself. Speaking of editing, as someone who spends most of their day sat behind a desk, I realized recently that it was probably time to upgrade my workspace. Thankfully, I had some help from my friends over at Vernal, who were kind enough to help me out by sponsoring this video and sending me one of their luxury hardwood standing desks. Now, I went for this very sexy walnut finish with a matte black frame, and I absolutely love how big and hard it is. Now, in all seriousness, I am somewhat notorious for having an untidy desk, desk, but that's where I really love this new setup, as it helps me keep my workspace super clean and clutter-free. For starters, this monitor arm gives me way more desk space, as well as full flexibility for positioning my screen exactly where I want it. The included cable management system means I'm no longer tripping over rogue wires, and the CPU holder mounts underneath so my tower unit is off the floor and out of all the dust. And it's also no longer clogging up all of my desk space. The desk itself is motorized and height adjustable at the touch of a button, so I can switch from being seated to standing throughout the day, which, by the way, isn't just a gimmick. Studies have shown that alternating between sitting and standing can reduce fatigue and improve focus. Now, if what I've picked isn't right for you, and you're curious about the different styles, then Vernal's website actually has a huge range of desktops, including their new laminated ones that look great and are really affordable. So if you want to upgrade your office setup with something that actually makes you want to sit, or, well, stand at your desk, then check out Vernal using the link in the description below. And don't forget to use the discount code on screen for 6% off your order. Now, let's quickly talk about the two lenses that this thing came bundled with originally, and that's this 12 to 45mm f3.5 to 6.3 and this 42.5 to 160mm f3.9 to 5.9. And yes, apparently that is a real focal length, and no, I don't know who in their right mind decided to approve that. Probably some kind of sex pest. But once you factor in the 2x crop factor of this 4/3 sensor, then these lenses equate to something like a 24 to 90mm and an 85 to 320mm. Numbers that are way less vomit inducing. However, just like the camera itself, these lenses are also very plasticky, very slow, and feel about as premium as a Happy Meal toy.
Please don't ever do that again.
Though that's not so much of a problem, because let me remind you that this does use a micro 4/3 mount, which means technically you can slap on just about any Olympus or Panasonic Prime if you're feeling spicy.
Hot and spicy meat. Yeah, boy.
So I immediately ditched these garbage kit lenses and have been mainly shooting with this Lumix 20mm f1.7 lens instead, which is a firm favourite of mine. Sure, the images shot with either of the zoom lenses are borderline, well, garbage, but with a decent chunk of glass on the front like this Panasonic lens, this thing can actually deliver. But if shooting RAWs isn't your thing, then to my surprise, this camera actually has a few decent in-camera color profiles to pick from, including Ektachrome and Kodachrome. It seems like they ripped a page from Fujifilm's playbook, because these modes try to emulate two of Kodak's most iconic film stocks, and the results that they create really aren't half bad. Plus, the nice thing is that these color modes aren't reserved for just photo use either. They can also be used with video capture too, but there is a catch, and a pretty dumb one if you ask me, which, let's be honest, no one is asking me, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. Setting the color profile on this camera into anything but standard will automatically deactivate RAW shooting. In other words, you can't do what most other cameras can do and shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time so that you get nice JPEGs with that film-like aesthetic straight out the camera, alongside RAWs that you can keep just in case you want to tinker with them later on. Nope, it's RAW or JPEG, not both at the same time. Well, unless you're some kind of pervert who is happy shooting vanilla standard color profiles. But where things get really off the rails is with the performance, because this thing is slow, like Game Boy Advance boot up screen slow. The autofocus is painfully sluggish, but given its age, that's probably hardly surprising. And for some unknown reason, when you're shooting in Kodachrome, it takes almost a century for it to write a single image to the SD card, making it borderline unusable. Though the biggest pain in the ass is that every time you take a shot, the screen just blacks out for a second, as if the camera's having a small panic attack. Or maybe that's just me as a result of using this thing for so long. Now, just as I hinted a moment ago, the Pixpro S-1 can technically shoot video, though of course, given its age, this tops out at 1080 HD at 30 frames per second. And honestly, you're probably better off just using your phone anyway, because the video footage looks mushy, the rolling shutter is pretty horrific, and there's obviously not going to be any kind of mic input, headphone jack, or any log profiles on this camera. So whilst this camera is far from being, well, revolutionary, why did this camera flop harder than a fish on a trampoline?
Oh my god, trampoline! trampoline.
Well, there are a few reasons really. Firstly, Kodak had no brand equity left by 2014. People at the time just didn't associate Kodak with cutting-edge digital tech anymore. Secondly, this camera launched into a fiercely competitive mirrorless market. Sony was already killing it with their APS-C alphas, Olympus and Panasonic basically had the Micro Four Thirds market completely locked down, and Fujifilm was busy dropping sexy retro bodies left, right and center. So what did Kodak do? Well, they made this. A slow, very plasticky, uninspiring body with mediocre lenses and a logo that felt out of place in a digital world. Then, just to hammer the final nail in the coffin, the marketing for this camera was absolutely abysmal. Despite the camera actually picking up a handful of pretty positive reviews online, most people didn't even know it existed, and those who did just didn't seem to care. So what happened to Kodak after this? Well, Kodak as a brand still exists today, though mainly as a licensing shell for gadgets, printers, and the occasional digital gimmick. The most recent one being the semi-viral Kodak Charmras, essentially keychain-sized cameras that come in blind boxes with a few different designs to find and collect. Funnily enough, the Pixpro line still technically exists, but the S1 was their one and only attempt at going toe-to-toe with the big boys, which in hindsight is kind of sad, because sometimes I actually think about an alternative universe where someone at Kodak actually had the brains and, well, the balls to do a Fujifilm, to take Kodak's legendary film heritage and build something meaningful on top of it rather than lazily using it as a gimmicky way to sell more plastic landfill slop. Because honestly, if this S1 had been better styled to match Kodak's film roots and marketed itself more heavily around its in-camera color profiles modeled after their iconic film stocks, just like Fuji has done, I genuinely believe Kodak could have stood a chance here. Hell, they might have even prospered in the mirrorless space. For now though, I'll just stick to bidding on Charmras like they're the next Bitcoin or something, because I swear one day buying old junk cameras like this will make me rich. Someday. Anyway, don't forget to use my code when purchasing your Vernal standing desk, and use the link below for an extra 6% off.